Sutra Resource Law of Obligation. No one owes anything to anyone unless we choose to. We should be more cautious when making promises and taking on commitments, fulfilling only those we consciously agree to ourselves. In 1966, investment analyst Harry Brown wrote a remarkable Christmas letter to his 9-year-old daughter, where he tried to explain to her that nothing in this world, not even love, should be taken for granted. I will give you one simple truth that took me years to understand. If you grasp it now, you will enrich your life in countless ways, and it will protect you from many problems in the future. Here it is: no one owes you anything. This means that no one lives for you, my child. No one is obliged to love you. No one is required to respect you. When people do something for you, it's because they want to, not because they owe you. The moment you understand this, you will avoid disappointment. Others are not obligated to share their possessions, emotions, or thoughts with you. And if they do, it's because you've earned it. You can then take pride in the love you've deserved and the genuine respect of your friends. But never take any of it for granted. If you do, you will lose these people. They are not yours by right. You have to earn their love and respect every day. No one owes you anything. In neurolinguistic programming, NLP, it is believed that the word should damages our psyche. This is because the word lacks clarity: who we owe, how much, for how long, and why. This is a typical structure of the so-called Milton model of language, which employs deliberate vagueness. Its essence lies in formulating phrases that sound specific but are general enough to provoke us to fill in the blank space with our unique internal experiences. The solution to this issue is replacing the assertion should with the question what if not. For example, instead of saying I should do this or that, we ask, what will happen if I don't? This helps us understand the real meaning, risks, and potential consequences of an action. When we grasp what we genuinely risk and what advantages we may gain, the rigid demand of should shifts to a multi-option model: I can do this, or I can do something else. We make a conscious choice, fully aware of what may happen depending on the option we select. It seems so simple and obvious, yet how often do we hear that we owe something? And how often do we say that someone owes us? Constantly, in all situations, from marriage and work relationships, where we believe our spouse or business partner must meet our needs, to discussions about moral, parental, civic, and other forms of obligation. The key lies in how such statements are perceived. A person can agree to the demand or can refuse, thereby denying their involvement. It's good to be an adult. You owe nothing to anyone. Dr. House. If we view a person as a multi-component system, we must perceive everything surrounding them as parts of that system. All components of the system are closely connected to the center, the person, and significantly affect them. The more important these components are to the person, the stronger the connection between them becomes. The formation of additional connections in the system leads to a reduction in the degrees of freedom. Two-way connections formed during interactions with others are influenced by external factors relative to the system. However, the primary influence remains the person, as the system's center. If the newly formed connection is not important, and the person doesn't assign significance to it, the connection won't be stable and will eventually disappear. Thus, obligations to others are only possible when a person believes in their importance. As a result, several outcomes are possible. If a person always acknowledges the obligations imposed on them, they become a dependent system. Such a person believes they have no right to refuse obligations due to upbringing or personal beliefs. This doesn't benefit them. More connections form in their system, and the degrees of freedom diminish, regardless of their will. These people often have fluctuating self-esteem, usually toward the lower end, self-loathing or even hatred, and frequent feelings of guilt. They tend to suppress their anger, leading to occasional outbursts of uncontrollable aggression. Dependent individuals struggle with communication, intimacy, and often face a higher risk of psychosomatic illnesses. The next scenario is a person who rejects any obligations despite the circumstances. They refuse to take responsibility, trying to maintain independence. However, this behavior is one-sided and often doesn't reflect the actual situation. Not everyone you lend money to will pay you back. Finally, the most harmonious situation occurs when a person consciously understands that they will always be the key factor in making decisions. Therefore, every connection formed in communication must undergo a conscious and objective validation. This way, the person determines when and to whom they owe something, based solely on their own needs. They are independent in their decision-making. The first step toward forming a self-sufficient, free individual can be the understanding that no one owes anyone anything. A free, independent person does things for others based on their desire, without expecting anything in return. Likewise, independent individuals view actions directed at them as a gift, not as a debt or obligation. One of the most universal approaches to the issue of obligation can be found in the work of the renowned Austrian, and later British, philosopher Sir Karl Popper, in his book The Open Society and Its Enemies. In the section Contract and Nature, Popper draws a strict distinction between the laws of nature and social norms. Laws of nature cannot be broken, while human laws are fundamentally based on agreements. Moreover, all social norms of human behavior are contractual only in a general sense, and in each specific case, a person decides for themselves whether to accept a particular social norm as a rule of conduct. In this, Popper significantly advanced the classical teaching of the famous German philosopher of the late 18th century, Immanuel Kant, on practical reason, which is guided solely by willful and rationally justified decisions, though a person may neglect their reason due to their own leniency. Kant's categorical imperative, which grounds the moral character of our actions, is expressed as follows: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. The famous contemporary German philosopher Jürgen Habermas added another condition for our decision-making: decisions must be agreed upon with others. He developed the theory of deliberative democracy, meaning democracy based on reasoned dialogue in decision-making. According to Christian sources, the most important actions in life must be done consciously, of one's own free will, as granted by the Creator. If man is created in the image of the blessed and transcendent Deity, and God's nature inherently possesses the ability to choose freely, then man, as his image, also possesses the ability of free choice and will by nature. Saint Macarius the Great, 4th century, said, "Visible creatures are bound by a fixed nature, they cannot leave the state in which they were created and have no will. But you are created in the image and likeness of God. Just as God is free and does what he wishes, so are you free. By nature, you are changeable." Kabbalah, on the other hand, asserts that God is unchanging in his relationship with people. A person can either become like the Creator, in which case their life will improve, or distance themselves from him, leading to a likely worsening of their life. However, in any case, each person chooses their own direction. Duty can become the meaning of life, but it can also destroy it. For Buddhists, the entire universe is permeated with duty as the law of cosmic order, which they call Dharma. A person must live in accordance with the laws of Dharma for their own mental and physical well-being. This concept of duty in Dharma is less burdensome than the European notion and significantly better at helping a person avoid inner conflicts. Not every twig bends by command. When a person accepts Islam, that is, submits themselves to Allah, they become His servant, while at the same time becoming completely free from other obligations and rules of the material world related to idols from their former life. From that time on, the Muslim is accountable for their actions only to Allah. It is important that the person entering the path of Islam does so by conscious and free choice. There is no compulsion in religion. Quran 2:256. Who and what does a person owe? Where do these debts come from? Do they need to be repaid? Do we have the right to freedom from obligations? Every day we act in one way or another because we feel obligated. But how often do we ask ourselves, do we really have to do this? A person feels responsible to their parents, children, friends, and co-workers. They take on many large and small obligations, debts, and missions that hinder their life, although often no one asked them to take on these responsibilities. For example, people often find themselves in situations where they bear a huge obligation to their parents. There are numerous stories of adult children living under the same roof as their parents, not having their own families, and fearing to leave their mother or father alone. Often, parents manipulate their children by constantly reminding them of the sacrifices they made for them. Yet their adult child lacks the courage and energy to break free and start their own independent life. Psychotherapist Nicole Prieur explains, becoming an adult means that we cannot fully repay our parents for what they have done for us. Every parent should remember that the love they feel for their child is a gift that expects no reward. Parents simultaneously give life to their child and gain life themselves. We pass life on. Understand that what we cannot give back to our parents, we give to our children, and they will pass it on further. Thus, not only parents are responsible for imposing debts on their children. Children are also responsible for their own choices. The saddest part of these situations is the realization that such a debt brings no joy, that it steals happiness and continues to spoil life. No one benefits. A parent living with their adult but lonely child will not feel happy, because it's hard to rejoice in a child who is clearly suffering and deprived of personal happiness. Such debts also exist in the professional field. Some people, in order not to harm relationships within the team, refuse promotions, viewing it as a lack of gratitude or betrayal toward those who helped them at earlier stages in their career. Psychologists argue that in this case, it is better to appear disloyal, overcome feelings of guilt, and move forward. After all, it's not about betrayal or ingratitude. A colleague to whom we owe everything is not our master. We've worked well together, but now it may be time to move on to new horizons. This can be painful but necessary. Otherwise, this imagined debt can cost us career growth or more exciting prospects. Friends sometimes meet out of habit or obligation, even when they no longer have much in common. Ending such uninspiring relationships is difficult, but necessary for personal growth. You shouldn't turn originally joyful relationships into a burdensome obligation. We shouldn't feel indebted to friends, because friendship implies a joyful exchange that everyone looks forward to, says psychologist Serge Hafez. If you have too much debt, let it go. A person chooses their own obligations. The human brain is wired with innate programs for altruistic behavior, which are an integral part of spiritual life. However, the decision to act on these programs lies with the individual. An equally important aspect of human personality is freedom of choice. According to the need information theory of academician P.V. Semenoff, a person's soul and spirituality are not in their words, knowledge, emotions, or position, but in the unique structure of two fundamental needs, the ideal need for knowledge and the social need to do something for others. Each person forms these needs differently, as well as their concepts of good and truth. Each individual decides when to act on their need for others and become kind, empathetic, and merciful. In general, the ability to express altruistic feelings is the foundation of human civilization's progress. A person feels the meaning and purpose of life only when they understand they are needed by others. Actions for others are carried out without expecting immediate social rewards, as humans are more spiritual than non-spiritual. Otherwise, we would not have evolved beyond animals. This is embedded in human needs, and they are indestructible. One should not pressure a person or force them to act against their own will. However, we can inspire them through our example, kindness, selflessness, and love, awakening in them the desire to do for others. Our respect for common moral rules is essentially the sense of duty. Adam Smith. Understanding duty is also a matter of freedom of conscience. Social morality, being a convention, imposes a significant number of rules and prescriptions. These conventions, however, have flexible boundaries, changing with the spirit of the times. A. Smith. Understanding duty is also a matter of freedom of conscience. Public morality, being a convention, imposes a considerable number of rules and prescriptions. However, conventions have flexible boundaries that change with the spirit of the times. It is impossible to live in society and be free from society. This truth is well known. But social structures can become outdated, and their morality nearly useless, even burdensome, in new conditions. The number of general rules and requirements that must be followed in the well-known way of life is familiar to everyone. Sometimes it's like a real forest, a darkness that entangles a person's will and mind, suppressing their intellectual and emotional independence. Therefore, over time, the need arises not only for changes in socio-economic formations but also for a revision of the corresponding set of moral rules that were once clearly dictated by the survival conditions of the time and have since outlived their purpose. People, economies, and geopolitics change. Revolutions. Any radical changes occur not only in the socio-political or industrial fields but also in the societal realm. If the English colonists in the New World had remained loyal royalists, the United States of America would not have appeared on the world map. The inhabitants of the British colonies chose loyalty to the ideas of freedom, equality, and fraternity over loyalty to the king. Internal conflicts in a person are often tied to the choice between necessity and freedom. But the very possibility of choice already testifies to the total freedom of the individual. We all remember Stanley Kubrick's film A Clockwork Orange, in which at the beginning we are disgusted by the cynical and brutal criminal, but by the end, we hate those who strip him of the ability to decide how to behave. The absolute villain is the one who takes away a person's right to choose. Interestingly, people often perform the most noble acts not out of a sense of duty, but by the call of the heart, whereas moral duty may push them to entirely different, sometimes even cruel actions. This is precisely how King Mark, the hero of the medieval epic Tristan and Isolde, acted humanely and sincerely. Captivated by the beauty of Isolde, the beloved of his nephew Tristan, King Mark took her as his wife. The relationships in this love triangle were tragic since they contradicted the norms of medieval society. Mark, upon learning of his nephew's affair with his wife, ordered, as honor demanded, their execution, and only fortunate circumstances prevented this. Tristan and Isolde were forced to flee and hide in the forest for a long time. One day, the king found them in a shelter. The lovers were asleep, and between them lay Tristan's sword. In those days, this scene symbolized the purity of their relationship, as the sword was a symbol of protection. King Mark was moved, and he placed his glove to shade Isolde's eyes from the sunlight and put his ring on his wife's finger. When the fugitives woke up, they immediately understood who had been in their shelter. The king's kindness and nobility overwhelmed them. In a moment, they realized the torment Mark was enduring, as the people he loved most were betraying him. After consulting a hermit who lived in the forest, they decided to part ways. Isolde wrote a letter of repentance to her husband, and he agreed to take her back. Tristan went on to serve another king and fulfill his knightly duty. Who borrows, acquires sorrow. Tasso. A brave man cares little for duty. But perhaps we do owe someone something, and this duty can lift and inspire us rather than bind and limit us. Yes, we owe it to ourselves. We must love, respect, and accept ourselves. We must take care of our body and soul. We must grow and expand our horizons. We must strive for our dreams and goals. We must be ourselves, not conform to others' expectations. We must learn to say no. We must understand why we came into this world. For this allows us to be unique individuals and live our own irreplaceable lives.